Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of our 7 Investing podcast. 7 Investing founder and CEO Simon Erickson. We're going to be chatting about digital advertising today. This is an innovative space of the market. There's a lot that's going on right now. We're going to be talking about connected TV. We're going to be talking about Google's technology changes. Separately, we're going to be talking about NFTs, but we're going to also be focusing first and foremost on the changes that Apple had, which allowed people to opt out of personal advertisements. And joining me is my favorite person in the world to talk to about digital advertising. Dhaval Kotecha is an individual investor. He's worked a lot in the digital ad space. I consider him to be one of the global experts here. Dhaval, always a real pleasure to have you on our 7 Investing podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Dhaval, I gave a little bit of a roadmap, but let's go to the first of those topics that we discussed, which is a couple of months ago. Apple had an update, its iOS 14.5 update, which is now allowing people with mobile devices to opt out of seeing personalized advertisements. Apple's, last I checked, is a pretty big company. Could you share some thoughts about what you thought about this announcement and how it might be impacting the digital ad industry?
Absolutely. So after this announcement by Apple, what the statistics that I have come across, right? So iOS advertisers, they experienced a 15 to 20% revenue drop and inflation in unattributed organic traffic, right? So just because the IDFA that got lost when Apple announced this change, right? Basically, there was a lot of drop in revenue. And again, like people kind of thought there would be more opt-ins, but only 20% of the consumers said yes to the ATT prompt, right? So the ATT prompt is what you see when you are going on the Apple's device and going on a particular app. And basically it will say, okay, do you want us to track your behavior? And when you say yes, then only those IDFAs could be shared, right? So if you saw in the post-IDFA world, especially like companies like Facebook and other social media companies, which were the most impacted from this change, they recommend focusing on a persona-led creative, right? So what that does is basically it allows them to regain the efficiency by allowing paid social algorithms to cluster users based on behaviors and creative trends, right? Now, like, without the deterministic attribution, right? So the deterministic attribution is something where you could attribute a particular app install with the IDFA. The advertisers, they lose the ability to effectively attribute revenue, and they are experiencing an erosion of lifetime value and effectiveness of those models, right? So just to kind of highlight what LTV means is it's the cumulative revenue a user generates since they install the app. And it includes revenues from in-app purchases and revenue from ads. So just because the advertisers were not able to track revenue effectively, ad dollars spent on iOS advertising dropped as it became less efficient due to restricted measurement and poor personalization capabilities. So where did they go? They went to Android. So according to eMarketer, marketing budgets were split evenly in February of 2021 between iOS and Android. By June, this was 30% iOS and 70% Android. So iOS advertising dropped, Android advertising increased around 8 to 20% due to Google maintaining advertisers' ability to personalize and customize ads properly, because Apple deprecated the IDFA, but Android continued sharing their Android ID with those marketers. So yeah, like mobile again, if you see, right, is a huge contributor in terms of the programmatic landscape, ad landscape, and people still spend majority of their time on smartphones. And I was reading a report from Statista, and on an average, like 57% of people in the US spend over 5 hours daily on their phone. And most mobile phone users check their phones up to 63 times daily. And 13% of the millennials spend over 12 hours on their phones daily, right? So obviously there's a lot of traffic, lot of inventory still coming in from mobile, and all these changes from say Apple kind of impacted a lot in terms of the marketers' capabilities to monetize the people who are there on the platform.
It certainly must be frustrating for advertisers when you kind of calibrate around the way that the industry is going, and then all of a sudden there's a wrench in your plans. You have to
Right.
start over. And of course, only 20% of people opting into ads to see personalized ads. That's quite a bit. That's a
Right.
big significant. Can you chat a bit too? We saw another announcement about Android. You mentioned that a lot of the ad budgets were switching from
Right.
Apple to Android, but now we've also seen that Google is considering cutting its cross-app ad tracking, which means a
Right.
lot of apps that were able to track with multiple locations of what you were looking at, Facebook
Mhm.
being one of those, might be even limited in what they can do on Android devices too. What's the announcement that Google just made? Why is it important?
So Google just made the announcement that they are going to deprecate the Android advertising ID, and it's the similar sort of ID which Apple has as IDFA, right? So they are going to deprecate that, and they're coming up with the replacement, right? So Apple announced something called a SCAD network, that where like the marketers were able to kind of attribute the app installs, but not at a user level. Similarly with say Google, they are coming up with say three main things, which is called say the topics, the fledge, and their core attribution API, right? So those were the three main things that they announced at this point, and I can go over each one of them very quickly if you want me to go over those.
Absolutely. It kind of flocks has been the new acronym at Google, right? The federated learning of cohorts. It sounds very similar to what you just described of looking more at the app level rather than the individual users.
Right. So the flock was something that they announced, and now they have deprecated that. So they're not going along with the flock because of a lot of pushback from the industry, and it was not well accepted. Right. So they kind of replaced that flock, and they already have a sort of timeline on their website. But again, like with say topics, right? So if I were to talk about topics at a very high level, so topics are like recognizable categories that are inferred based on the app usage of an individual. So as an end user, if you are on an app that pertains to sports or say entertainment, you fall under those topics. And if you stop visiting the sports app after a few days, then you drop out of that topic and don't get the ads served relevant to that topic. Moreover, like you as an end user, you can see and control the topics on your device, right? So you can say, okay, I do not belong to this topic anymore, even though you are telling me I belong to this topic. Or you could say, okay, I don't want to kind of pick any topics and I don't want relevant advertising. So you could say, okay, do not use any of the topics for me, right? To target me as a end user. But again, like you see, right, there's no user level data that is getting passed. This is all like how the user is basically using the app, and it's automatically categorizing into certain topics. So that was the first thing that they announced. The second thing that they announced was something called Fledge, and Fledge is something that it's introducing a new way to show ads based on custom audiences defined by the app developers and the previous interactions within their app, right? So this information and the associated ads are again stored locally, so no individual identifiers are shared with the external parties. And this is specifically for enabling the remarketing for businesses to their existing customer base in a very privacy safe way. So again, like if you are say having a particular item in your cart, then what they will do is they will build the audiences for people who have the items in their cart, and with those sort of audiences they will try to run those campaigns and try to remarket them, right? So that's the other initiative that they kind of launched was Fledge. And the third thing is obviously the core attribution API, right? So right now what's happening is marketers are relying on all these device identifiers, right? So advertising ID and whatnot, to be able to evaluate the effectiveness of the advertising. And that's a user level data. And now the attribution reporting, it aims to replace the current methods of the measurement with solutions that don't rely on those user level tracking mechanisms. So people's information is protected in a much better way. right? So these are the three things that they announced, but the good thing is these things are not happening immediately. So Google has already mentioned on their website that they are going to take another, like around 2 years for doing development, testing, and obviously adoption of these technologies.
Makes a lot of sense. We'll see what else they want to deprecate. Google likes to think of things and then change their decisions on where they're going. But I mean, Dhaval, our audience for the show is mostly individual investors. This is fascinating. The industry's changes are happening quickly. Even years out, this is a really big change for a huge industry. I have read previously that even just from Apple's changes last year, that Facebook, now Meta, is
Right.
estimating $10 billion in sales losses because they're not going to have the granularity of data. Do you think there are any companies who are either big winners or big losers potentially from these changes?
So I would like to kind of point here that, like, I think open internet companies benefit from these changes, and that's contrary to a lot of people think, right? So people usually like to club all these companies into a single bucket, like, okay, we are selling the ads, and these are like ad tech companies, right? So they club Facebook, Snapchat, Pinterest, Twitter, Trade Desk, Roku, everyone in the same bucket. But again, like, certain companies are different than the other companies. And I would like to kind of, what I usually like to do is to kind of put them into two different buckets. So the first bucket is your wall gardens, which is your Facebook, Snapchat, Pinterest, Twitter. And what they do is they must monetize every single user on their platform. And that's where you see like MAU being a very important metric for these companies, right? Now, the second bucket, which I differentiate, is the open internet companies, which is like, say, your Trade Desk and such. And these companies, what they are doing, what they are having is these companies are constantly getting a stream of requests from the supply side platforms like your Magnites and Pubmatics of the world. And the advertiser on the demand side, they don't have to bid on every request if it didn't make sense to bid on those particular requests. And they could be very selective in picking up what requests they want to bid on, right? So if you have kind of listened to the calls, like earnings calls on Trade Desk, Jeff Green, the CEO, he has maintained that they haven't seen any impact due to the IDFA deprecation. And the reason is that they are processing 12 million QPS, and only 1 million QPS was data with IDFAs, and which they could choose to ignore if they wanted to, right? So as these social media companies, they lose sales. And you mentioned Facebook, they lost an incredible amount of sales due to this change. Open internet companies are benefiting from these moves, given they have got something called UID 2.0 and IDL and such identifiers to help them determine the traffic at a user level and enable the marketers to accurately target the end user. So deterministic traffic is the key, where if you are able to target the user, like end user at a user level, right, basically, then that would be more valuable. And that's the reason why I think like open internet companies are poised for success more so than the wall gardens at this point.
And it sounds, Dhaval, too, if I can add my thoughts on this and you can tell me what you think about it, but they don't have a lot of that legacy regulatory baggage that the walled gardens do, right? Everyone remembers
Right.
Facebook and the data privacy and all of these concerns that regulators have just congregated around or continually bombarding them with. If a trade desk or any other programmatic platform can start from scratch saying, hey, we're going to build a more private identifier that's not going to expose that data, that seems to be the direction that at least consumers and certainly the regulators want to move.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Changing gears a little bit, I wanted to chat a bit about connected TV. This is kind of a new media that's come out. You know, we've seen linear broadcasting move to over the top in recent years. And one of the things that I always like to track is just how much higher the advertising rates are on CTV versus just a display ad on a desktop computer or even on mobile. Do you think connected TV is an important medium for advertisers to start pursuing?
Yes, absolutely. And again, like, you have to understand, connected TV is something where people will get deterministic traffic, right? You don't have issues with cookie ID deprecation. You don't have issues with, say, IDFA deprecation or Android ID deprecation, right? Uh, every connected TV request like even if you are, say, if you are a Roku user, then you have to log into your account basically with your email address, and therefore you are easily trackable at a user level or at a household level compared to, say, your other devices, right? Say mobile, and that's controlled by, say, Google or um, Apple, right? So again, like, CTV is where the growth is, and I see that the cord cutting trend is well and alive, and it continues to accelerate, right? And obviously, you see, right, there's a lot of push, and you'd see like there's a lot of increased CPMs with connected TV, just because that's the medium that people are kind of spending the most amount of time on. So connected TV, like using like different apps to consume the content on the internet versus from the linear TV. So tremendous growth in that connected TV space. And I constantly keep hearing, like, if I jump on Trade Desk and Roku calls, they keep saying, okay, we doubled, tripled our connected TV revenue growth, right? So basically, that's where they are seeing the most amount of revenue come from.
Roku is a battleground right now, Dhaval. Just this
Yes.
last week, it announced, it gave earnings, stock fell like 30, I guess it was 25% at one point.
Right.
It seemed like the platform revenue was still growing at 50% a year, but they were having some supply chain challenges of actually getting the TVs delivered. Of course, when you're talking connected TV, you have to have the TV in the first place.
Yes.
Most people aren't
Yes.
replacing those as quickly as smartphones. But thoughts on Roku right now? Is it still long-term bullish and short-term problems, or is there something more that we should be paying attention to?
I do think long term I'm still bullish on Roku's, but like this quarter was not what I would have expected. And obviously there has been, like, it has been hit by the supply chain issues more so than the others. And obviously, like, there are two aspects to it when they have like partnerships with the OEMs, and that's where, like, they cannot kind of reduce the prices on the TV just because the TV manufacturers are in control of managing their prices. They could come down with the player prices, like, say, the Roku sticks and so, to kind of push them into the users' homes, but at the same time they cannot control the TV aspect of things. And the TV aspect of things, I think, is much more important, right? Just because people are not changing their TVs as frequently as, like, how they could go and change the players, right? The sticks per se. So yeah, like, if they are not able to increase the active accounts, then eventually you will see a hit in their ARPU numbers. Like, ARPU numbers are still heading in the right direction, and again, like, that's the one thing that I'm kind of still focusing on. The streaming hours, like, the engagement is still up, but I would want to see them kind of increase that active accounts to kind of fuel the flywheel. And obviously the monetization is the most important part, and I would want to see the ARPU still go up. Right now, like, it has kind of slowed down just because of all these issues.
I do want to, while I have you here, ask a little bit about engagement and monetization with CTV, because it seems like that's still the earliest innings of this story. But in the traditional sense of advertising, we
Mhm.
saw Google got 10x its ad rates when it moved from CPM, cost per thousand impressions, to
Right.
CPC, of what people were actually clicking and
Right.
interacting with on the websites. And of course, that's easy to track on mouse clicks, but it just seems, and I know that you and I have chatted about this before, that CTV is offering a lot more engagement potential, because
Right.
you can make custom ads that are fit to the right person who's watching that show, and
Right.
it's video rather than just an advertisement on the side of the web. I mean, how do you see, could you talk about what the format of CTV ads you think will likely evolve into in the next few years?
Right. So again, one thing here, while we are at Roku, they also hinted, like, they have been working on something called a branded studio in their sort of a roadmap. And the branded studio is specifically for them to design the ads which are pertaining to CTV, right? So obviously there's a lot of innovation that's happening around that space. Obviously, just because they are seeing the growth in CTV, there has to be the creatives that needs to be innovative, right? So you could see like people watching the CTV content and they could interact with their ads, where they could say, okay, have an ability to put in their phone number or put in their email address, and then they get a link on their mobile device, and then they could kind of go and make a purchase or do whatever the advertiser needs them to do when they kind of interact with the ads, right? So, and obviously, like when you talk about CPM and CPC, this would be something where you would go to CPA, which is cost per acquisition, right? So in that case, they would kind of track, okay, how many people actually put their mobile number when they interacted with that particular ad. And basically that's where I think the world is moving, the CTV is moving in that direction.
Perfect. And any companies in this space, Dhaval, you really like? We chatted about Roku quite a bit. You mentioned some of the platforms like the Trade Desk or Pubmatic. Any others that we should be paying attention to as investors?
Yeah, so I think CTV, Magnite, and Pubmatic on the SSP side, Trade Desk, Roku on the demand side, definitely, like those are the two big players in the connected TV space.
Perfect. And then last but not least, I want to completely change directions here. Let's talk about a completely different platform. But I know that you have been really involved with NFTs, with
Yes.
non-fungible tokens lately. This is something that's still a head scratcher for a lot of people. People don't really understand this, but you are actively buying and selling them these days.
Yes.
Maybe if I can just let you talk about your experience with NFTs, what you're doing, and maybe any advice or things that you'd like to pass on to investors that are interested in this.
Right. So I actually started buying NFTs in September of 2021, where I was enamored by this space. And I was kind of, first I brushed off this space totally, where I was thinking, okay, why would someone pay a ridiculous amount for a JPEG? But again, like when I understood, like it was not just a JPEG, it was a community that's being built around that JPEG. And JPEG is just in like something that's in front of you, but there are like underlying tokens. And obviously the premise of Web 3.0, the ownership premise, and that's something that's like fascinating. And obviously, like I've been a part of a lot of communities for these NFT projects, and I've seen like these communities are doing like a lot of innovation. They're building a lot of stuff. And obviously, like if you want to kind of get involved, then you could go get involved in like two different ways. And this is where I see, like I would categorize like NFTs into two broader categories. One is your PFP projects, and PFP projects is your profile picture projects, right? So profile picture projects are those projects which have a cute picture of a cat, ape, dog, fox, or any such art. And these are those things where you see on the profile pictures of a lot of people on Twitter, right? And you must have seen, right? Twitter also came up with a profile picture verification, like in the past month or so. And they are able to verify the ownership of the NFT. Then only you could kind of place a profile picture. But then in that scenario, what's important is not the art, and the community that the project has drives these projects more so than the art. And again, like if you see projects like Bored Ape Yacht Club, right? Do I think the image of the Bored Ape is worth that much money? No, it's not. It's not the image that is selling for that much. It's the community behind it that is selling, like that is causing it to be so valuable, right? So that's the first thing. And obviously, like what drives these projects is a well thought out roadmap by the team and them executing on what they set out to do, right? So it's similar to your companies where the management is telling, okay, we'll achieve these metrics in this much time, and when they achieve it, people kind of like, obviously the fundamentals and the stock prices go up. And similarly in this case, when these founders of these projects, they execute on their roadmap, obviously the project becomes much more valuable. And then the second thing is obviously the art projects, right? So the art projects are where the real artists are trying to sell their art. And these artists could be anyone, right? So basically, say photography, generative art, illustrations, design, music, even writing, right? So this is where I think the most value will be created in the future. And in the past few months, what I've seen is there's a huge influx of artists who are moving from, say, different platforms, like, say, Instagram. Like, people, like, say, from photography, illustration, design, they were predominantly on Instagram, but now they are moving into and starting using Twitter to kind of showcase their talent, like minting those NFTs and trying to sell their art and selling that to the people who are on Twitter, who are kind of willing to buy and support those artists, right? So they are able to monetize. And I've seen like a lot of people making like life-changing money by kind of sharing their art with the community. And I've been kind of actively buying and supporting those artists. And I do think they are the ones which are kind of going to stay for the long time. With the PFP projects, I think like 99% of the projects will go to zero. And that's where like people will kind of talk about NFTs as a scam. But obviously, like, not all NFTs are the same. And everybody, like, it's one sort of an investment vehicle, and you have to kind of do a lot of your due diligence in that too. So obviously, like, PFP projects are dangerous, but artists, not so much, right? Because if they are constantly coming up with new work, then they are going to become much more valuable and will be able to demand like much more value in the future.
I really appreciate this perspective, Dhaval. It's so often that we see the mass market be dismissive of innovative new things. So much of what you just described was exactly what I saw in the earliest days of Bitcoin, where everyone was just passing it off as it was a scam and you would immediately get hacked and lose all your money. And yet at South by Southwest, our auditoriums full of lawyers and business people in industry, people trying to figure this out and how this technology, that's the blockchain, is going to be applied for them.
Right.
And it sounds very similar to what you just described with NFT, where the attention and the headlines and everything is focusing on, oh, these idiots are, going to lose all their money from, these goofy ape pictures like you were talking about.
Right.
When in reality, there are some fundamental changes that are taking shape with industries.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, well, once again, Dhaval Kotecha, individual investor, knows a ton about digital advertising. Now I'm dubbing him the NFT guru. We'll have him chat about that again in the future. Dhaval, really a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us in the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you everyone for tuning in to this edition of our 7 Investing Podcast. We are here to empower you to invest in your future. We are 7 Investing.